I'm concerned that he's starting to bring some of his left-wing junk science over to the right and using the credibility he's gained from COVID to push it. And I'm talking about his comments about, food and pesticides and, chemicals in the environment. All that was left-wing stuff.
Hello and welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop. My name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
And it's almost Christmas.
Oh.
And if Phelim starts singing Last Christmas, it's going to create a lot of difficulties. So
it's a historical document, Anne. It's a historical document. It's a music video which you can watch on YouTube where everyone looks like Princess Diana.
Okay.
50th anniversary, I think, this year, or 40th.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Phelim. But yes, we did watch it on
on
repeat the other day. We even danced to it. That's a whole story that we're not going to get into right now.
It's the 40th anniversary of Last Christmas.
And poor George Michael is dead and buried a long time now.
Yes.
As a friend, as somebody we used to know in Ireland, an old gentleman who used to work at our house used to say, it'd be hard to pick him up now, which is a very funny expression, actually. But anyway, no one's picking anyone up.
One thing I would say about Mr. Michael...
George,
he had the misfortune, he died on Christmas Day.
No. What did he die? He died of a drug overdose.
I think degradation of his body due to drug consumption.
Such a shame.
May have been pneumonia or something that got him.
Such a shame. Super talented
Christmas
guy.
Day, he died on Christmas.
Okay, Phelim, what's happening in today's scoop?
I want to talk about George Michael, but anyway. So RFK, as you probably know, maybe going to be the Health and Human Services Secretary. But do his beliefs and claims match up to the reality? We discussed that with Zachary Levy in last week's podcast, which you really want to catch, the 2-week interview with Zachary Levy. There's a lot.
We look at us turning into Joe Rogans all overnight. Yeah, we went down to Texas to interview Zach Levy, and we'd always sort of thought it'll be an hour.
Yes.
So 3 hours later, look at us turning into Joe Rogan.
They ended up as 2 podcasts. So in this interview, we bring you a very timely interview with someone. In this episode, we bring you a very timely interview with someone who has been writing about junk science for 25, 30 years. And we ask if RFK Jr. is protecting health or is he straying into junk science?
And we also talk about the latest news, very big news, important news about a big announcement from a very close friend of ours.
Yes.
You want to hear that?
Yes. And talking of big announcements, although is it a big announcement? Trump is now Time Magazine of the Year. I think this
Time Magazine Man of the Year.
Oh, yes. Man of the Year. I think this means cancel culture is over. So we'll talk about that later on. And great news for children in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, as the dominoes of the trans madness are falling.
So whatever bad things you can say about the UK, I have to say they are really surpassing themselves in being the world leader in demolishing the trans madness and the trans craziness and doing something actually for the medical establishment that needs to be done, because it continues to be the horror of our time, and I think the horror of nearly every time. It's very hard to think of anything in history quite as demonic and deplorable and just really very, very frightening than operating.
We will come on to that. We will come on to that.
Healthy children,
We're in the teaser section now, Anne. We're not in the show section. I know that. I mean, mind you, I would give me a moment and I'll start ranting about trans and children.
And we also want to talk about Biden. So a lot of people... Who? Yes, exactly, about Joe Biden. Who apparently is still the president of the United States. And a lot of people have been commenting on him kind of being invisible. However, what we're going to talk about a little bit today as well is the fact that while he may appear to be invisible, he and his administration are very busy trying their very best in these last days before the inauguration to destroy every possible success that Trump is trying to achieve.
Yes. What they're trying to do is to bring in all these ridiculous rules, handing out doses of money.
We're not going to talk about it yet, Phelim. As you said, it's a teaser. We'll look at that in a moment.
Okay, so let's get on to the show. As I said at the beginning, there's a lot of talk at the moment about RFK and his claims about the food supply. And even last week, this came up a lot in our interview with Hollywood star Zach Levy. He talked about the food being poisoned. I pushed back on that. He talked about the food industry corrupted. We had a spirited exchange, I believe you would call it that. But what are the facts behind this? And, you know, there's no one better to talk about this than Steve Milloy, who has been literally running the Junk Science website for 30 years. He used to have a weekly opinion piece in Fox every year, you know, Junk Science of the Week.
Every week.
Yes, every week, yes. And so we interviewed Steve uh, earlier, so a while back, actually. And let's go over to that interview now, where we really try and parse the good and the bad of RFK, and we also say, you know, if there is doubt. Anyway, we'll get to the interview. Let's go to the interview. So I'm joined now by our old friend Steve Milloy, who has been fighting junk science and agenda-driven science for more than 30 years. We've known him since the early days, I would say, since Mind Your Own Business. He's a biostatistician and a lawyer by training, and has had many hats. He's been an environmental and public health consultant, a securities lawyer, an investment fund founder, a coal company executive, a non-profit executive, a columnist, and has written extensively on science and business issues. He sits on the board of 6 not-for-profit organizations focused on energy, environmental, and investment issues. He's written 6 books. He's written thousands of articles, I would say, and he served on the transition team for the Trump EPA during 2016, 2017. And he's very, very welcome to the show. And I really want to hear his opinion on certain recent developments. So welcome to the show, Steve.
Hey, Phil. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you. So let's start at the beginning. Tell people why you set up Junk Science and what you've been doing like for the last 30 years, and or actually what you did at the beginning, and we can come on to whether it has changed in recent years. But what was the original reason for setting up Junk Science?
Well, I had been a securities lawyer, and then when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, the stock market went to hell, and so did my job. And so my next job was working for a regulatory lobbyist in Washington,
Mm-hmm.
D.C., and he hired me because I was a lawyer and had a background in biostatistics. And we started working on EPA risk issues. And I did nothing about the environment at all. I just sort of learned as we went along. But it was a great experience because we worked on just all sorts of different projects with EPA. I started the day that the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 were passed.
Mm-hmm.
And it quickly became obvious that the environment was just full of nonsense, full of lies, bad analysis, scientific, economic, just the whole gamut. Eventually, I was hired by the Department of Energy to push back against EPA and its abuse of science. And then along came the internet, and there you go, junk science.
Yeah. I have to say, it's you were hired by the Department of Energy to push it back against the EPA. That really says it all about the power of the
Yeah,
EPA. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, and over the years, you can probably tell me more about what you've done. You've really led the fight against climate alarmism, against environmental alarmism, against chemical alarmism.
Yeah.
All the tell
Alarmism.
us the alarmism, but give us a flavor of what you were doing over the years.
Oh my God.
Uh, well, I just want to say to people, this is important because I believe we're in a different world now, and I want to talk about what you were doing originally, and where everyone was allied and who your friends were.
Yeah. So over the years, whether I've been an industry consultant or a government consultant,
Mm-hmm.
I have worked on all things EPA. I have worked on air issues, water issues, pesticides issues, waste issues,
Mm-hmm.
um, just everything, especially the epidemiological aspects of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't, I've worked, now a big issue is ESG. Actually started working on it. I was the first one in the conservative movement to start working on that 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It was called corporate social responsibility.
That's right.
Um, I worked on radiation issues. If you want to know why there's no nuclear power, I can explain that to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
every nutty thing that comes along, people, you know, I'll put it this way: everybody says they care about the environment, but few people take the time to learn anything about it. Most maybe they'll read newspaper articles or watch TV or something like that. I've spent 34 years on a full-time basis looking into this stuff, not because I like it, just because I've been fascinated by the lying. It's just
Yeah.
incredible.
And look, I don't want to summarize, 30 years of work, but the general thread is that environmentalists and activists exaggerate, lie, scare about everything to in their anti-progress. I would call their anti-progress agenda. They, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that most of my work has focused on what the activists have done, but I'll say there are businesses that lie about this stuff too. There are regulators that lie about this,
Hmm.
trial lawyers. I mean, there's famous individuals that want to be known for something. There's a lot of junk
Yes.
science is bad. It's not just bad science; it's bad science used to advance an agenda.
Hmm.
Okay. And there's,
Yes.
that everyone has an agenda across the board.
But I suppose now to get to the crux of the matter, the science. I think the science community had relatively clean hands. I think up until the climate wars, I think that was the beginning of the corruption of science.
Mm.
But previously, maybe I'm wrong, but previously I feel like there was honest mistakes. Thalidomide. These are honest mistakes that maybe they ignored the warning signals, but it's not wasn't out of a deep corruption or a politics driven agenda. Uh, th- then climate changed everything, where the solutions to this problem, the solutions to global cooling and the solutions to global warming seem to be uh, the same basically left wing solutions. Shut down industry. America's to blame. China's not. Russia's not. It's anti American, anti business, anti agenda. And that really corrupted science and led to an increase of agenda driven scientists siding with environmentalists, siding with activists.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say that I think the modern era of junk science really goes back to Rachel Carson and her, screed Silent Spring.
Hmm.
Um, then we get to, there's all sorts of tobacco junk science that was very big. Um, and I'm skipping over a lot, but you're right. Climate is where it's really all come together. When I first started working on these issues,
Hmm.
environmentalists they cared about everything: air, water, pesticides, waste, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But over the last 20 years, they've forgotten about all those things. They've thrown all their chips in climate, and climate has become this all-consuming scare
Yeah.
that it's in the media every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we got to COVID.
Yes. No, COVID. I mean, that was a classic junk science episode to tragic consequences.
Hmm.
And, it was no surprise to me. I had known Fauci was a bad apple. I mean, he had lied about HIV
Yes.
back in the day. And I had known about the corruption of the public health bureaucracy for decades. I had been exposing it on junk
Hmm.
science, constantly. I used to write a column for Fox News for 9 years. Every Friday, I had a junk science column, and a lot of that was about the public health establishment.
Hmm.
Um, but of course, people have to have their lives destroyed before they come to
Yeah.
realize, how bad things are.
Yeah. So that brings us on to the very interesting situation we have now, where RFK, Robert uh, Fitzgerald Kennedy, is probably going to be the next um, Health and Human Services Director,
Yeah.
probably the most powerful health person in America, maybe the world, and maybe he's going to have a lot of control over a lot of scientists, give out money, etc. Just have an influence. And I think we both know that Robert Kennedy in the past has been a pusher of junk science. Now, and I'm not talking about vaccines, but we can talk about that too. We know him through fracking, where, to me, this is the most egregious junk science that he pushed, because there's no, I know everyone says there's all these studies that prove vaccines don't cause autism. There's not that many studies, and, I think it deserves a lot of investigation rather than just being dismissed. I think,
Yeah.
but fracking, contaminating water and poisoning water, it's very measurable. You go to a place that has water, take a water sample, go off, measure it, test it, and say it has either fracking contaminants in it or it doesn't, and they always don't. But Robert Kennedy didn't want to listen to the science, didn't want to listen to the person in the white coat with a chromatography machine or whatever it is, and basically stop fracking in the Delaware River Basin, stop fracking in New York, to huge personal damage done to struggling farmers, um, against the science. And now he's been put forward. And I think the problem is people don't trust scientists anymore. Back when you started, people trusted science. They trusted the experts. Am I right? And now they don't trust them anymore.
Well, COVID really changed things around.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone got to see how the very top, the very top of the American scientific establishment just lied to their teeth about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Everything.
people are, reasonably skeptical now. I had been saying that for years. Scientists are not special human beings. They're just
Mm-hmm.
human beings. And there's good ones, bad ones that tell the truth, ones that lie. And the same is true. That happens in science all the time. Now people realize that. As far as RFK, I mean, he was a radical environmentalist,
Mm-hmm.
always. He takes credit for cleaning up the Hudson River. I think he made it worse. Um, I don't. I think your description of him as disregarding science is accurate. He has become now famous because during COVID, he was, essentially right about what was going on. Of course, everything was so egregiously bad, and they tried to shut him up, and that just made things worse. And so it really built him up. Um, but COVID is the only thing I can think of, as far as environment or public health and science that he's ever been right about. And so, even a broken clock is right twice a day, but Kennedy's only
Mm-hmm.
been right once in all these decades. I mean, he's 70 years old, been working on these issues for more than 40 years. He's only been right once.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate his support for Donald Trump. And I fully support him. I mean, there is a lot of corruption in the government and
Yeah.
this media suppression. He's 100% right about that stuff. But you know, putting him in charge of HHS and the science, if he's going to root out corruption and help people understand things and root out the lying, I'm all for that. I'm not necessarily for him setting the policy agenda, though, in terms of what we do for food and the environment.
I suppose one of the first things what he has to do, I mean, if he's going to be serious, he's going to have to take on his friends in the environmental movement. I mean, he's going to have to call them out, isn't he? Um,
Well, I don't know how much of an opportunity he has at HHS. Because he's going to be focused. That's a huge department, running everything from Medicare to scientific research. Environmentalists, where the interaction is, there's a lot of funding for green
mhm,
activists that comes out of HHS and
yes.
NIH, and so he can either green light that or stop that. My guess
Mhm,
is he's probably going to green light it. But at least he's not an EPA, I guess, as far as the
yes.
environment is concerned.
Well, what about the idea that he's that he's red pilled now. That I mean, the Democrats, his friends rejected him, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and look, some of the most conservative people I know used to be former liberals,
Yeah.
because maybe you were yourself, uh, because and they're very effective because they know the way liberals work. They know what appeals to them. They know about the emotionalism of it. Whereas if you were born conservative, with a rational brain, it's sometimes hard to understand what's going
Yeah.
on there. So, is there hope there?
Well, so this is the really interesting part of this now, Phelan. When I started out fighting junk science, invariably it was usually from the left. These were all left wing activists. Okay.
Hmm.
Kennedy, he may have been red pilled to some extent, MAGA pilled. I don't know what you want to call it.
Yes.
Trump pilled.
Yes.
um, but I'm concerned that he's starting to bring some of his left wing junk science over to the right and using the credibility he's gained from COVID to push it. And I'm talking about his comments about food and pesticides and chemicals in the environment.
Yeah.
All that was left wing stuff,
Yep.
and now it's infiltrating on the right. And I mean, it's astounding to me that he's had success with that, and it concerns me a great deal.
Good point. Good point. You're right. There's so much junk science, uh, about food dyes and pesticides. And you're right, it used to be a solid left wing.
Yeah.
But you see, Monsanto only has itself to blame, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Uh, I mean, Monsanto has been trying to show the left how nice they are and how wonderful they are. And the
Absolutely.
left has just been suing them in court with junk science.
Absolutely.
And the more it's like an abusive relationship, the worse the left are to them. I mean, I approached Monsanto a few years ago before all this stuff, and I said, "You guys do amazing stuff," and they do. Like Monsanto, is feeding the world. Monsanto, I think, they behind golden rice. They do. They do wonderful things, and their pesticides are wonderful things that is feeding some of the poorest people on the planet and increasing yields.
Yeah.
Could I get them to take my call? Could I get them to have a meeting? Could I get them? I said, look, I'll do a documentary about how wonderful you are, but I need to talk to some scientists. I couldn't even get them to answer my call. I remember I used to leave. I would through a whole rigmarole. I would phone the headquarters, ask for the press office, leave a message, leave a message, leave a message. No response. I would uh, send emails to their website. And of course, they've one of these websites where you have to fill in this form. There's no email, there's no email address for a press officer or a press
Yeah.
office. You have to fill in this form. So every time you want to go there, you have to fill in this laborious form. And no response, no response. And eventually I remember I searched the internet, and in one press release, they accidentally put the cell phone of a press officer, and I called him and was like, oh yeah, send us an email. So I sent them an email, and no response, no response. We're very busy, very busy. And I'm going, what are you busy with? Like you're facing existential lawsuits
Yeah.
about one of the best products that humanity's ever seen. And I remember they were coming to some conference here in LA, and I said, let's meet for a coffee. Sorry, too busy. I'm going. So, and the reality is they were too busy sponsoring, you know, the LA Film Festival or whatever they were doing, like sponsoring, giving money to their enemies.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so
and
Phelan, it's not just you. I mean, I have friends who have been consultants for Monsanto and Syngenta and Bayer and all these big ag companies, and they tell me that they're these the staffs there are all confused. I mean, they get mixed signals from management. I mean, they sell these products; they're not allowed to defend them, and this is true really across the chemical industry. When I started out, I could get a chemical company as a client to defend it on the scientific basis. but
yes,
that but in the 1990s that changed. They started becoming politically correct and trying to get along, trying to buy off the opposition. Of course, you can't do that, and it never worked. And you're right, so Monsanto and Bayer have had these monstrous lawsuits against
Yes.
them for glyphosate, billions and billions of dollars,
Hmm.
and it's all junk science. You would think that they would reach out to people, get better lawyers, get better consultants, but they haven't. I mean, because they're confused themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the left used to say, capitalism is a capitalist is someone who will sell you the rope to hang themselves. You know, modern day capitalism seems to be they will give you money, so you will hang them. They will pay you to hang them. Now, it used to be they would, at least in the old days, they would sell you the rope to hang them.
Yeah,
Now they'll give you money so you can construct the scaffolding, and they'll
yeah.
even put their plaque on it. This gallows was funded by Monsanto. So am I right? I mean, so you're saying I'm wrong to be cautiously optimistic or nauseously optimistic about Robert Kennedy?
Well, we'll have to see what he does and what safeguards are around him. But there is an issue when he goes on TV and says that the food industry is poisoning us. I mean, that is an untenable position, and especially for a guy who's going to run the regulatory agencies. The food industry is poisoning us. Who is it poisoning? How is it, where are the facts to back any of that up? He doesn't really have any. He just talks about it.
Yeah.
And, it has that his language has clicked with a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
in the that are conservative. And so now this
Yeah.
is used to be just a left wing problem. Now it's a right wing problem too. And I don't, I'm not quite sure that that's what President Trump really wants.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I remember like 15 years ago, I thought I should set up a coffee shop, right? Where, for conservatives, we only use GM modified foods. You know, if the food hasn't been irradiated, we're not selling it. And, um, and have merch and, the merch, but sewn in a sweatshop in Indonesia. We're not, if it's, we only want, you can smell the sweat from the sweatshop, stuff, this piece of clothing has educated 3 children in a family in the woman may have got put a little label, the woman may be lowly paid, but she's put her kids to school, thank you, sweatshop approved,
Yeah,
boom, right. I'm not sure that kind of coffee, and you can imagine conservatives flocking to that, right, in a big city or whatever.
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
sure conservatives would flock to that now, given the way the world has changed.
Yeah, so this make America healthy again. On its face value, I'm all for that. I see that there are lots of obese people, but I know that that's a more complex societal problem.
Hmm.
And you can't say the food industry is just poisoning people. It's a lot more complicated than that. And yeah, I think people should eat well. I think that everyone should have unicorns and all the good things in life. But
Hmm.
of course, we live in the real world. Things are a little different.
Yeah.
You see a lot of these TV hosts that have interviewed Robert Kennedy. I won't name any names, but they imagine, oh, people just need to have access to fresh vegetables and but of course they have to be able to afford that stuff and then have the time to make it and know what to do. And so these issues are a lot more complicated.
But also, sorry to interrupt you, but like access to fresh vegetables. Look, then the left oppose Walmarts. Remember back? I mean, there was a. I mean, one of the first when we first came to LA, Walmart wanted to open in Compton, and all the
Yeah,
local representatives opposed the Walmart and successfully opposed it.
yeah,
Um, so you can't be complaining about food deserts and then
yeah,
blocking large
yeah.
supermarkets.
Right. No, absolutely, absolutely. But it's just that, these even conservative elitists are out of touch. Um, yeah, you go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or other pricey stores. Everything is great. The vegetables and produce are the highest
Hmm.
quality. They look the nicest. But I tell you, I live in the Washington D.C. area. If I go to the local grocery store chain, I mean, it's clearly a step or two down from Whole Foods, and um, people are just out of touch and don't understand these issues and don't
Yes.
understand. Robert Robert F. Kennedy has launched this crusade now with a couple other people against ultra processed foods.
Hmm.
They're trying to pretend that processed foods are something new. No, we've had processed foods since the 1950s. They're processed foods necessarily involve preservatives and
Mm.
salt and sugar, and there's all it's how you have to process them to make these mass quantities available to
Hmm.
people. We don't yeah, there's a story now about how, well, in Canada Fruit Loops are dyed with blueberries, whereas here, there's some blue dye. Well, of
Mm.
course, Canada is a tiny country. It's really only a few million people compared to the United States.
Mm.
And it's just not possible to have enough blueberries to dye everything that needs to be dyed blue, or what
Yeah.
consumers want dyed blue. So, and if you look further, there's really, people don't like the idea of artificial dyes, but there's really no science behind it showing that
Yes.
they're causing any
No.
problems, and
Correct.
nobody seems to care about that. It's like, if it has a chemical name, it's bad, and I am used to that from the left. That's where all this stuff. That's where all these organic food, the whole organic industry came from.
Hmm.
And just I'll shut up after this.
No,
People
no,
should
no, don't.
people should know that when the whole organic thing became official in 2000 during the Clinton administration, the day the agricultural secretary announced the policy, he said that organic is just a labeling thing. It does not signify healthier or safer food. It's just labeling. It's just how it's produced.
Well, by the
All
way, I think it's was it Walmart or Costco have just launched one of the biggest buybacks of callbacks of organic carrots because
okay.
there's an E. coli outbreak that has killed a person. And
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
always the organic because I don't want to gross people out, but organic means no artificial fertilizers, so you have to fertilize it from somewhere. So it's animal fertilizer, which if it doesn't get cleaned off, it causes E. coli and
Yeah.
kills people and kills children.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you have to be very careful with all produce, but especially organic, because you're right. It's not, no pesticides, grown in not in synthetic fertilizers, but in manure and, other conditions. And
Mm,
right.
mm,
So all these issues are very complicated, but, Robert Kennedy's out there just saying, the food industry is poisoning our children. And that's wrong.
yeah. Well, listen, I could actually, you said there, I'm going to shut up. Please, please don't, because it's actually, it's worth talking about this, and it's worth. We seem to be the only people who are saying this. Actually, it's very interesting. Um, and I'm, I don't know if I'm not cautiously optimistic, but see, the problem is I want to burn it all down. Uh, you
Well, I
know,
just, it's fascinating because all these, conservative doctors and personalities that became
Mm,
known during COVID, they have hopped on board the RFK train. Um, and it's concerning to me.
mm-hmm,
Yesterday, I saw a piece from Robert Malone, for example,
mm-hmm,
where he is trying to scare people about endocrine disruptors, glyphosate,
yeah,
the herbicide glyphosate as an endocrine disruptor.
mm,
He doesn't know anything about these things, yet he's using. Yeah, I guess he's maybe trying to suck up to RFK, or he's just trying to run that, trying to surf that Maha wave.
mm-hmm,
And this is what somebody told him about. He
yeah,
doesn't have any idea what he's talking about. He's just unnecessarily scaring people about food safety.
mm-hmm. Okay, okay. Look, let's resume. Let's keep this conversation going. If anyone disagrees with us, please write to us in the comments on the YouTube video. I imagine there's a lot of people out there, even in our audience, who will disagree with us. But we've got to stick with the science. We've got to stick with principles. Actually, that there has to be data, and you know graphs and chemical. We actually have to find data, and there has to be proof before we start even looking at something. You just can't make blanket statements, and
Yeah.
this is not who we are, and we shouldn't go there because that's a leftist thing to do. It's an emotional thing to do. It's not a rational thing to do. Am I? I'll give you the final word there, Steve.
Well, yeah. So, when I talk about these things, I try to be gentle on the internet, on X, at Junk Science is, my feed. If you just raise questions about what RFK is doing, I mean, I just get the most vile comments back from,
Yes.
all anonymous. And look, we need to be able to ask questions. We couldn't ask questions during COVID, and look what happened.
Yeah.
Okay. When the food supply disappears, you're really going to be upset.
Yeah. When cheap food disappears, that I mean, inflation let's say, I was going to say inflation got Trump elected, but inflation was a very, very powerful driver
Mhm.
of getting Trump reelected. You know, Look, if you start banning pesticides or for no reason, you're going to have more expensive food. Um, then that's where people really notice inflation. People are kind of used to the price of gas going up and down and up and down and up and down. I'm not sure they really attributed that to Biden Kamala axis, but they're not used to expensive food. Like even in our house, I know we would go to the shop. I mean, Anne still talks about she picked up an onion at Trader Joe's. It was $1 for an onion. Like we never noticed the price of onions before. You just buy a bag of onions, and but suddenly an onion was $1. When you make it more expensive to grow food, and suddenly you're on $2 onions, that will be dangerous for the Trump project.
Yeah, I mean, so the elites that sit on the couches and talk about this stuff in media studios, yeah, if the price of meat goes up 50%, they can still afford to buy meat.
Yes.
But what about the other 90%, 99% of the population? I mean, it's a real problem for them.
Yeah.
And if you can't grow food without pesticides, you're going to have less food. There's a reason places like that sell organic food are a lot more expensive because it's a lot harder to grow the food.
Hmm.
Eh, you
Yeah.
know, um,
I love there was sorry, we're going to end this, but I love there was a tweet recently. Farmers market. Who knew that cutting out the middleman would make food more expensive? You know, It's, 3 times I would make food 3 times as expensive. And it's like there was an article in the LA Times recently. Why are all the farmers markets in LA failing? Because the food is not great and it's very expensive. It
yeah,
just doesn't look great and it's very expensive. Anyway, look, we could talk all day about this.
you could.
Um, Thank you. And if anyone disagrees with us, please write in the comment section on YouTube. We want to keep this going. It's important that we talk about this and we just don't accept saviors in funny clothing. Um, so, Steve, how can people find you? Where do they go? How do they get you on X/Twitter, etc.?
Well, so my website is junkscience.com, but I spend most of my time on X at Junk Science, and I debunk this stuff all day, every day.
Yeah, at Junk Science. Okay, Steve, thank you very much for coming on.
All
And
right, man.
I think we'll be talking to you again.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye. So let's see what RFK does in practice. I think we covered it there well. The uh, if big ag and big pharma are anxious now, they only have themselves to blame.
Hmm. Hmm.
They don't defend science. We'll come on to it later. They jump on every ideological bandwagon. They push DEI. So it used to be remember when we started in the conservative movement, we were defending big business. We were defending big capitalists. And what do they do? Turn around and demonize us and give their money and their time and their energy and their love to the leftists.
Hmm.
So, you're hoisted by your own petard.
Oh, look at you, hoist by your own petard.
I just want to talk about my best piece of journalism ever. I was covering a story about a Romanian gymnast who had taken a small amount of drugs and was banned from competing, and the a senior member of the committee, Jan Syriac, who's the former tennis player,
Yes.
said he had to resign because he was the one who brought in the rule, and then he presided over her taking drugs. It was all, and I used the phrase, he was hoisted by his own leotard.
Oh dear. But you're very proud of that film. You never forgot about that.
That's
Isn't
my
that
best
lovely?
piece. That was about 30 years ago.
Yes, hoist by his own leotard. Okay, so in very good news, and moving on swiftly from that, there's been all these announcements of Trump appointments, and with each one it's been very exciting actually, and it's the drip feed of them has kept everyone very busy, because sometimes you know the name, sometimes you don't know the name. Well, one name was very important to us, our board member Mark Paoletta, who is an extraordinary person, who was announced as the General Counsel for the OMB,
the Office of Management and Budget.
Yeah.
So when Mark's on our board, we're a not-for-profit, the Unreported Story Society, which is always in need of funds.
Yes, and coming up to the end of the year, don't forget us, please. Yes, tax-deductible donations to the Unreported Story Society. .com.
That's the unreportedstorysociety.com.
But just
Everything you give will be
exactly
tax deductible.
But just back to Mark. So the OMB is obviously, possibly, arguably, definitely the most important office in the White House. That it controls the money, basically, and it knows where all the money in the federal government is going and where it's coming from, which means it also controls all the policies and regulations that control so many of Americans' people's lives. So we're very excited that Mark is back into that job that he had in the last administration, and he's there with Russ Vought, another great American and very brilliant, and they're going to tag team with the DOGE commission. I don't know if I'm saying DOGE right, but anyway, the Department of, what's it called?
Government Expenditure
to get rid of
certain Mr. Musk and a certain Mr. Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, so here's what Trump said about Mark. Mark is a brilliant and tenacious lawyer who worked tirelessly to advance my agenda in the first term. As the OMB General Counsel in my first administration, Mark led the charge to identify funding to build the southern border wall and worked with then OMB Director Russ Vought to rein in woke and weaponized government spending. Mark is a partner at the law firm Schaefer Jaffe and a senior fellow at the Center for New America. But more importantly, this is what Trump had said, but we will add to that. And obviously, Mark Paoletta, and you've heard him speak here on this podcast. We've interviewed him a number of times. He was very, very significant, instrumental in making sure that Clarence Thomas was confirmed to the Supreme Court.
Yes, and has been defending Clarence Thomas's reputation and legacy ever since, against terrible, terrible media reporting and terrible, terrible government and Democrat attacks that are basically false and fake.
And actually, and to add to that, so if you're ever looking, if you ever hear anything about Clarence Thomas and you think, wow, that sounds terrible or whatever, go to Twitter and go to Mark Paoletta's Twitter handle. We should put that name of his Twitter handle up there on the screen and follow Mark, because Mark basically, you will go back through the history of his tweets and you will see how he has defended Clarence Thomas with facts.
Yes.
With facts.
I just want to say if you want an example of how egregious and deceitful the left have been. So there was this report recently that Clarence Thomas accepted a vacation worth £250,000 from a billionaire. And
$250,000 probably.
Sorry, $250,000, and didn't declare it, and then was forced to declare it. Complete nonsense. So what happened was they changed the rules that if you stayed in someone's house, if you stayed in a house that was owned by a company, by a limited company, then that was taken as a resort stay. You were staying at a resort. So if your friend, and of course, rich people, for privacy reasons and to protect their assets, very often their names are not in the house. They set up a limited company. Lots of people in New York do this for very valuable assets, like, $10 million apartments. They set up a limited company and the company owns it. So the Democrats changed the rules that if you stayed, and then they said, well, this is a resort. It's owned by a company, not a person. And then they said, well, how much would it cost a person to stay for a week at an exclusive and take over the entire resort for a week? So they guesstimated that it would cost £250,000. Now, the place is not available for rent. It's a house, not a resort. There's no money or profit being made. But they determined that he had accepted a holiday worth $250,000.
It's incredibly dishonest, and
Yes.
their attacks on Clarence Thomas are shameless, and so unfair, so unjust, really horrible. And he's I mean,
So
it's
Mark Paoletta
Mark Paoletta is great, and
it's going to be a great
it's going to be
moment in the
exciting.
administration.
It's going to be very exciting.
Yes. So Time Magazine, you remember them, man?
I remember Time Magazine.
Do you?
So now, finally, they've done something really good. So they
Yes.
have announced that Donald J. Trump is, in fact, the man of the year.
I would say this is an example of perhaps cancellation culture is dead or dying. Now, it won't be. It's not dead because these things always pop their head up again. But yeah, so they went from the gavel, the Trump under a gavel, he's going to go to prison, to Trump is person of the year. This is an example of, I think Time Magazine is recognizing the writing is on the wall that this cancellation culture doesn't work. I was listening to Pod Save America, which is a bunch of Obama bros who have a podcast, and they were talking about the left. There's this big debate. It's a civil war. I'm going to do a piece on it in the new year about there's this civil war on the left. How do we win elections? And we go to the center, or do we go further left? And there's also this thing is we need to create our own Joe Rogan. Right? We need to create our own Joe. We need to create 30 Joe Rogans. And like as somebody did say in Pod Save America, we had Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016, right? But because Joe Rogan went off script slightly about, I don't know what, the trans issue or whatever, he was completely ostracized. Nobody would go on his show then, and if you went on his show, it didn't matter what you said. It was the fact you went on his show was enough to get you cancelled. It's like these attacks on the lady who went to visit Assad, who's now up for the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like she went and visited a
head of state,
right? Who's a neighbor of Israel's, right? At a time when so. Going to visit these people, going on these shows is not a endorsement of what everything the show person says, but also just because someone disagrees with you on one or two things, it's not. So they created the Joe Rogan, the Trump endorsing Joe Rogan, by expelling him from polite company. So there's no point in creating 30 Joe Rogans if you're going to expel them, if they don't support you fully on Israel, if they don't support you fully
on everything on your agenda. They're not allowed to have free thoughts. Basically.
Yes, free thoughts. And to be fair to these guys, they did point out every successful Democrat has kind of run against the Democratic Party. Like Barack Obama kind of ran against the Democrat establishment. Bill Clinton ran against the Democrat establishment.
Yeah. Well, the Democrats have come a long way since Bill Clinton.
Bernie Sanders ran against the Democrat establishment. And Bernie Sanders went on the Joe Rogan show, by the way. And, nobody cared because everyone knows that Bernie Sanders has certain political principles, whether you disagree with them or not. And by the way, can talk for 3 hours. I'd say he could talk for 33 hours about them. So I suppose this is a long way of saying cancel culture may be dead. There's this understanding in the left now, or in the sensible left, that they just can't, that the cancellation doesn't work because they create these power bases, this alternative media of the cancelled people. And Trump went over there, talked for 3 hours, and won the election. Now they're not, so.
Well, I think a big argument for why they lost the election is that they lost their base by being so extreme and by continuously bowing to a very small, probably a very, very small percentage of their voters. Mm-hmm. With these very, very extreme views.
Yes.
I mean, if you think, like, just on one example, which would be the abortion issue that we happen to know a lot about, Bill Clinton talked about safe, legal, and rare. Rare. So he used the word rare. Safe, legal, and rare, which was the Democratic position at that time. Now the Democratic position, which is very few years later, by the way, is up to 9 months and
celebrate it.
Up to 9 months and beyond, and
celebrate your
absolutely no limits of any kind, and an abortion for any possible reason. Mm-hmm. That's what they're embracing. And then if you think of the trans issue, which I think was very significant in this election, very, very significant, is cutting off the healthy limbs of children.
Yes.
and supporting an idea where people are listening to 4-year-olds saying that they're identifying as a different sex when 4-year-olds can identify as pirates and you don't cut their legs off.
Yes.
You know, this is complete madness.
Or give
so
them
they
an eye patch.
So
Yeah.
what they did was they bowed down and embraced the most extreme, possibly extreme, the absolutely most extreme progressive ideas, and by doing that, they lost.
I think
they
that's
lost
part
the-
of the cancel culture
they
as
lost the
well, though.
centre.
I think that's part that.
Well, this is what happened to Joe Rogan, by the way. I think it was a
That's
trans. I think it was a trans issue that he landed on, and I think was it Spotify then decided they would have to remove some of his
That's right.
some of his
That's it.
content.
Yes.
And they went out. Some of the people working at Spotify took to the streets and protested. Yeah, but
That's
I think Spotify have all moved on from that now, by the way, because
Yes.
they realised this wasn't a great idea because Joe Rogan has the biggest podcast on the planet Earth.
And I think the Democrats have realized this, that rather than be out there protesting Joe Rogan because he disagrees on one thing. Did they think that was? See, I suppose they thought they were going to cancel Joe Rogan, get him fired, and
also, by the way, that's the chilling effect. So what you do is somebody as big as Joe Rogan, they were hoping to destroy him, and that'd be a very chilling effect on others. They'd be like, well, now you see what happened to
Yes.
him. You better just pull that opinion of yours back to where it, and put it in a box because we're not going to put up with it. But talking about the trans issue, by the way, really good news lately. This is coming up to Christmas, and good news is a great idea. So the UK, which is leading the way basically and being really extraordinary on the trans issue, world leaders basically. So the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland,
Yes.
as Phelim always calls it,
which
has
is its
now
proper title.
has now in the last very recent past here have just announced basically that they are banning, completely banning children receiving puberty blocking drugs to facilitate a gender transition. So it's a permanent thing.
Yeah, it was temporary up until then, and it's to protect. According to the statement, the decision is based on independent advice from the Commission on Human Medicines, which has determined, quote, there is currently an unacceptable safety risk. There was always an unacceptable safety risk. The idea that you would give these drugs and stop children from who would just complain that they didn't feel safe in their identity or didn't like this, or their parents were transing them because their parents are like these stage moms who want their kids to be different. It's Munchausen.
Basically, yeah. So how extraordinary is it that Charlize Theron, who adopted 2 children from Africa, in an international adoption, which we have a lot to say about international adoption. I'm going to park that for the moment. But the 2 children that she internationally adopted, she has transed both of them, and they're little people. They're little children.
Remember, Angelina Jolie tried to trans her daughter.
Yeah, so
right,
I think the daughter now has sorted herself out.
Oh no, the daughter's wearing all these really feminine dresses now, and going to red carpets and flaunting her body on, her female body on the red carpet, and it was,
there's a reason. Obviously our listeners are all very smart, but there is a reason why you can't get married until you're a grown up. You can't vote until you're a grown up. There's a reason why you can't drink until you're a grown up.
Can't join the army.
Because basically you're a child. And it's all delightful, and you should be innocent, and you're an idiot basically, but no one's going to listen to you. No one's going to listen. The idea that you would be listening to a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old, if you listen to a 4-year-old, should they want to eat donuts as the only meal that they want to have all day?
You mean you can't eat donuts
Apparently,
all day?
It's not a great idea, Phelim, and I know you've tried it, but you can't be doing that now. During COVID, we lost the run of ourselves completely. We did have quite a period of time where we had ice cream for dinner. Yeah. And that's not a great idea, by the way. It adds up very, very quickly. So, yeah. No, you don't want to do that.
For the girl with the hourglass figure, time runs out very fast.
Oh, Phelim, look at you. Where'd that one come from now? That's not an original one, by the way. I don't think that's original. But it's good, though. We'll take it, though. We'll totally take it.
Yeah, I think I should claim it as original, and no one's allowed to Google it.
But
okay, put in the show notes if you find where that quote is from.
So in bad news from Kim Strassel. So Kim Strassel was writing in the Wall Street Journal recently, and she wrote a really great article looking at. So she's basically the title of the piece, by the way, and you should read the whole thing, is Joe's Last Hurrah, and it's interesting. A lot of people have been saying, like, where's Joe Biden? And he's been kind of missing in action. But guess what? He is in action in some form, or at least his administration is feverishly busy trying to preempt the progress that Trump is going to be trying to do. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to Trump-proof the federal government. She gives a list of a whole lot of ways in which they're doing that, but there's just a couple of ones that I wanted to bring to everyone's kind of consciousness, because it's not good and it's very worrying, and I'm really just hoping. I'm just kind of just hoping that Elon and Vivek will have some clever way of reversing some of this.
I just want to say the whole administration's added, and I'll talk about that after you go through the list.
So there's just a couple of ones that jumped out at me, and the first one was spending. So the chief of staff, Obama, or not Obama, listen to me, Obama. Well,
what do you call
by the
the
way, by the way, you know, maybe it is Obama, but anyway, Joe Biden's chief of staff, at least on paper, Jeff Zients, bragged, he has just so recently bragged, that some 98% of the money from Biden spending bills, including the 2021 infrastructure law and the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, has already been allocated, flowing to clean energy grants, high-speed internet, semiconductor plants and more.
In other words, Biden's friends.
Biden is similarly rushing out billions of available military dollars to Ukraine. And this money is being rushed out now in these final days. On the energy front, the administration has just recently announced a pathetically small lease sale in the Arctic National Wildlife Reserve refuge, which is an attempt to sabotage larger Trump exploration plans. As the Alaska governor, Mike Dunleavy, noted, the sale limits exploration to the largest extent possible and is designed to fail. And then this is the one that really killed me. On the union front, the Social Security Administration Commissioner, Martin O'Malley, signed a contract with the American Federation of Government Employees Unions, allowing tens of thousands of employees to continue working from home, even in the Trump administration. The administration is said to be working on other deals to insulate federal workers from Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's Department of Government Efficiency. So this is extraordinary. So they're signing contracts right now in these waning days of this administration to try to destroy the Musk and Ramaswamy's efforts to rein in government.
And the EPA, I just noticed, I saw this in a different place. The EPA has joined the fray, you know. I know they're supposed to be one of these independent groupings. But they've decided that in the last month or two of the Biden administration, they're going to ban carcinogenic chemicals. It's nonsense. They're not carcinogenic. Trichloroethene and perchloroethene, so TCE and PCE, they're used in cleaning products and dry cleaners, that kind of thing. And they've been accused of damaging the environment. And this is basically all these places will have to close. Dry cleaners will have to close. So it's really to force the Trump administration to overturn the ban, and then the media
and look bad.
The media will say Trump, and Kennedy, RFK want cancer-causing chemicals in the water. They're all hypocrites. This is a long and tried playbook. Like in the closing days of the Clinton administration, Clinton decided after 8 years in power, it was so disgraceful that there was a certain amount of arsenic in the water in certain places in America, which is some of it's naturally occurring, and that the water had to be a certain, and they reduced this down. Now, this was going to put burdensome costs on communities in West Virginia and other places where this was occurring naturally or as a result of industrial activity. But Clinton didn't do it at the beginning of his 8 years. He did it in the last month so that the Bush administration would get all these headlines, Bush in favor of arsenic in the water.
Right.
Now, there was such an outcry from the dishonest media who were really powerful then. That's the difference. Hopefully, they won't be as powerful now. That eventually the Bush team had to relent and they went with the Clinton regulations. So they put this enormous financial burden on on these small communities to put in water cleaners and water purifiers and build infrastructure that they couldn't afford. So will Trump have the courage to stand up to this blatant political use of the EPA? However, the mainstream media may not be as powerful, but the right now, unfortunately, seem to be adopting the left's fear of chemicals. So that's going to be a very interesting fight within Trump world. So let's see how that works out. So that's the end for this weekend.
Yeah, and next week is Christmas Day. So the next podcast is coming out on Christmas Day, and it's going to be a very special podcast. We're going to record it in Ireland,
Oh, yes.
and you definitely don't want to miss that. So I hope you've done all your shopping and that you're not having a panic attack, that it's almost Christmas. We still have some days to go. But we're not
Do you
finished.
think it'll be snowing in Ireland next week?
Gosh, I hope not when we're trying to drive around the roads,
Oh,
Phelan.
that's true.
Yes,
That's true.
but still, we'll be very happy to be over there, even though the days are really short. I don't know what time it gets bright in the morning, like 9 o'clock probably. It's probably dark
I
at
can
4.
look at my cameras.
No, don't do it now. But anyway, we will see you next week then on Christmas Day.
Adios,
Take care.
amigos.
Bye.
Bye.